Okay, can you guys hear me now? Let me know in the future when I'm reading your messages. Can you guys see me okay? I'm like kind of nervous, kind of excited. It's a whole new vibe. We're in my new studio today. We're looking at like the other side of my face, which feels really weird. Like it's so ingrained in me that like when it's time to talk to you guys, I turn not this way, but the other way. So there's going to be like a learning curve for me. But let me know if you guys can hear and see me now. I hope you can. I'm gonna double check. I'll be awkwardly panning a little bit over to my right and putting my back to you today because that's where I've got my little sidecar set up where I can see the feed and all that stuff. Let's have a look.
Seems like
Okay.
the sound is proper now.
Okay. You guys can hear me. I think you guys can see me. Hopefully you can hear my buddy Rafa. Rafa's here with me. It's going to be a good grade school, guys. I'm really excited to be with you guys. As I said, I'm here in my new studio today. I've kind of been like waiting for like the perfect time to like spend a couple hours like fussing over like how to set up the camera and like where to put the lights and all that stuff here in the studio, like for purposes of YouTube videos. And this morning, I just really wanted to show you guys the space, and I didn't spend a bunch of time on those things. So we'll refine as we go. Maybe it's not perfect today, but I figured it'd be fun to show you guys where I'm working these days. So for those who don't know, about a month ago, a little bit less, I moved into this new space, which is offsite from my house. As much as I love working out of my house and will continue to do so at least some of the time, for client-facing sessions, my place with a almost 2-year-old and another baby on the way has officially become kind of a stretch for doing uninterrupted focused client sessions. So I decided to get some space off site. Really glad that I did. Really happy with the setup that I've got here, and really excited to have like a dedicated space where I can make content for you guys and hang out with you guys for grade school. And lest I be throwing any shade, I wonder if my lady and my young lady, Bridget, are out there watching this morning. If so, hi, Bridget. I hope you're watching. I love you. And I love you, of course, too, Mommy. So I hope they're out there watching. But anyway, we got an AMA style grade school today. I'm excited to do it with you guys, even if it means the weird learning curve of learning to pivot to my left and not to my right when it's time for me to address you guys. It's going to be fun. Let's have fun with it. What's going on with you guys? What are you working on? What are you excited about? What are you puzzled by? What's fun in the world of color grading? I'm trying to think if I have anything like super fun to share with you guys, like off the bat. We talked a little bit last week, I believe, or no, what was last week? What is time? I'm so fuzzy on time. Last week we were in my advanced show LUT design course, so we didn't get to do a grade school, so I'm glad to be back with you guys. Ruff, am I getting that right? Last week was, we were down from grade school, right?
Yeah, no grade school last week.
Okay, cool. My dad brain is going strong this morning. Anyway, last week was my show LUT design course that we did for alums of my Colorist Career Accelerator course. First time doing the course, it was a blast. We also unveiled my brand new plugin that I'm going to be sharing more with you guys about here in the coming weeks. We're going to be launching it, making it available in a lot broader way in the coming weeks, so stay tuned for that. Really, really excited about that. But that's what I was up to last week. That's why I wasn't able to do grade school last week. We had a blast with that, and really excited to be back with you guys this week. So I would say for me, my practice, I've got two things on the brain. I've got lookdev on the brain, and I've got another thing on the brain, and that's what you're looking at down here. I've got these panels here. I'm really excited about them. There were just enough things that I've always like missed and wanted and needed from the mini panel that I decided to go back for the advanced panel here in this space. And funny enough, I was like, and you know what, like my muscle memory will totally come back to me for like how to use those panels. Like I remember where all the buttons are and stuff. But since I was last regularly using those panels, Blackmagic came up with a whole overhaul of the keys on the advanced panels. And it's not like a subtle change. It's like a complete redo of where everything is in the panels. So far, I really, really like it. And I think it's like a huge improvement. But the other thing on my brain is I kind of feel like I'm sort of like learning to play an instrument right now. Like I'm still nowhere near like as comfortable here as I am on my mini panel, even though I know I'm going to get there. And I love having like mapped access to like so many features here on the panel that are not available on the mini. Right now, I feel like, I don't know, I feel like I'm like learning to drive. Rafa, do you guys drive on the left side of the road where you are?
Uh, no,
You
that's something that they as far as I know, only happens in Australia and England.
Okay. The rest of Europe still has its wits about it. Well, so I'm glad I didn't say I'm learning to drive in some random place in Europe. I feel like I'm like learning to drive in England and like driving on the left side of the road. Kind of like I feel in this setup, like everything is new and a little bit unfamiliar. So it's cool. It keeps me on my toes. I definitely feel like very awake and present right now. So anyway, that's a little bit what's on my mind and kind of where I'm at. Have we had a chance for any questions to come in yet, Raf?
Yes, we do. First of all, we have a question about your new studio. It seems like your walls are painted at 18% gray. Is that a thing?
That is a thing, and yes, they are. That's actually how they. So I'm in a VFX facility here in Los Angeles. That's primarily what they do here in this building, and the walls were actually painted that color when I moved in. So it was a light lift for me. Funny enough, the first thing I thought when I walked into the room before I even thought better of it, I was like, man, I would like to spice it up in here. It's a little bit boring. I'm like, oh wait, that's actually a good thing. But I still might add like this accent wall. I want to give you guys a tour. Maybe next week I'll figure out how to get another camera in here so I can kind of give you a tour of the rest of the space. But essentially, the client area is over here in front of me. So there's a couch and a client monitor and all that stuff. So I actually am kicking around the idea of like maybe this wall over here, making it like an accent wall and putting like some vibey wallpaper or something on there. Or maybe that's a terrible idea. I don't know. But yes, 18% gray walls, and they came that way. So I was glad of that.
Also, another question about your new studio. Is there something different regarding your panel compared to your old one?
In terms of control surface, do you think that's what that means, Rafa?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I can't remember. You guys probably can't really see my control surface in the old spot when I'm broadcasting. I'm usually working with a mini panel and a stream deck, and that's still what I have at home. I still have that set up at home, so we haven't done our last grade school from there. I'll be kind of fluidly bouncing back and forth, but I've got client sessions today, so I'm up here anyway and wanted to try and do it all from one place. But yes, at home, I have a mini panel with a stream deck. It actually works really, really well. I've gotten really comfortable and really fluent working in that format, but there are a lot of buttons here on the advanced panel and even more on the like revised keycaps for the advanced panel, which came out, I don't know, like 2 years ago or so, that are like awesome to have on the panel. Like a couple easy examples of like, there's a toggle so that I can toggle in between group, pre-clip, clip, and timeline level of the node graph. I can toggle between all of the different pages. I can apply grades from, like clips forward and backward. Like the whole premise of these panels is that unlike the mini panel or any other panel, if you know where everything is, you really don't even have to have a pen in your hand like I do right now, kind of out of habit. But I'm when I'm in between sessions right now, like my batting practice that I'm working on is putting everything down, and even when I don't know where something is, instead of just reaching for the pen because I can get to it really fast, being like, okay, let's find it. If I can't find it, look in the manual. So it really is like I feel like I'm like doing my scales on a guitar or something and like learning how to play them. And it's not very pretty to watch, but it's going to lead to the really fun experience of having everything at fingertips on one surface without really needing to keyboard or mouse or pen tablet at all, which is exciting.
We have a couple of questions here about how to evaluate lookup tables. The first question is how to use the Fusion page to analyze a LUT, I assume using a color cube. And also, what do you think about those charts that are meant to evaluate LUTs and see if the image breaks at any point?
Cool. This is fun stuff to discuss. So let's talk. I mean, you guys want to geek out? You want to go into Fusion for a minute? I feel like we go into Fusion, 3 or 4 times a year here on grade school. And I don't think most of us probably aren't mad that's the frequency, but it's the end of the year. Why the heck not? Let's go into Fusion and talk about evaluating LUTs. This is right on brand for stuff that we were talking about in my advanced show LUT design course last week. So I don't know. Let's go into Fusion and let's just evaluate some of the Voyager LUTs. So here's what I'm going to do. As soon as you go into Fusion, just some trying to think of like how to not make a whole Fusion course out of grade school. Super simple. Fusion operates per shot. So right now, whatever shot I'm on, I'm going into what you would call a comp or a node tree for that shot. So if I'm on shot 3 and I tap Fusion and I start adding nodes and doing stuff, and then I go back to the color page, tap shot 4, and then go back to Fusion, I'll have a whole wiped out brand new comp because every shot has its own associated Fusion comp. Fusion doesn't know what's in your edit. Fusion doesn't know anything about what's going to happen in the color page. All it knows is the single image that you are working on the comp for, and it is not applying any of the processes that are happening here on the color page there inside of Fusion, which is actually great news for what we want to work on right now. So here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to go to Fusion, and what I want to do is get a look at, you can see I've got a 2D viewing of my image just in its original like log form here. And I'm going to set this so that I can see it on my reference monitor as well. And what we want to do if we're going to evaluate a LUT, let's just do this. Let's come up with some simple color management. So I'm going to tap on a node, hit Shift Space Bar, and I'm going to pull up a color space transform. This is the same color space transform as we have in the color page. There's a lot of these open effects filters that live in both places. So we're going to go area wide gamut 3, area log C3, DaVinci wide gamut, DaVinci intermediate, and no tone mapping. And now I'm going to hit Command C with that node selected and hit Command V. And now I'm just going to move this downstream a little bit. I'm going to go up here to my color space transfer. Oh wait, can you guys see my screen? Probably not. Hang on. This is a bad thing to demo without you being able to see my screen. Aren't you guys proud of me that I caught that and Rafa or Gadali didn't have to jump in and say, hey, show us your screen? I'm very pleased with myself. Okay, so backing up a little bit. Here's what you will see when you go into Fusion for the first time on a clip. What I'm going to do now is set up some color management so that I can see this image running through the same pipeline that I would have it running through in Resolve. So I've got my CST, and this is just so that I can see the image. Okay, so wide gamut 3, log C3, DaVinci wide gamut, and DaVinci intermediate. Now I'm going to hit Command, and I'm going to turn off my tone mapping. Now I'll hit Command C and then Command V, and I'm going to paste that right in line into this sort of same path that I have here. And this is where I'm going to go out to 709. Easy trick here is to hit this swap button. And now I'm just going to change my output to Rec 709, Gamma 24, Luminance mapping, max 10,000, max output of 100, gamut mapping yes, forward OOTF yes. Okay, so now I've got an equivalent rendering of the way I was looking at this image in Resolve a moment ago. What I now want to do, because we asked about how can we evaluate a LUT in Fusion, and what are some of the things we can do in Fusion that we can't do on the color page. The main thing is to evaluate a LUT in 3D space. So here's what we're going to do. We've got these 2 viewers by default in Fusion. If we wanted to only have 1, by the way, I could just tap here, and now I've only got 1 viewer. But I'm going to leave this at 2 because I want to get a 3D cube view over here. So here's what I'm going to do. This time with nothing selected, I'm going to hit Shift Spacebar, and I'm going to just look for cube and then go LUT Cube Creator. And now I'm going to hit Shift Spacebar with that selected, and I'm going to look for a media out, okay? And now, if I tap 1, that's going to deposit this LUT Cube Creator asset into the viewer for this first kind of viewport here. And what I now want to do is right-click, and I'm going to say, I don't want to view this as a 2D viewer. I want to see a 3D histogram, okay? Now I'm going to go to 3D histogram and set this to solid, and I'm going to set my sampling to 1:1. So I've got a nice dense cube going on here now. And now anything I place between here and here, I can see the results of it on my 3D cube. And what can we learn about evaluating LUTs on a 3D cube? It's really simple. Like, you can't learn everything about a LUT just by looking at the cube. But in general, if the cube looks smooth and continuous and yeah, like really like smooth, then you're going to have a higher likelihood that it's going to make images look smooth and continuous and sensible. And if it doesn't look smooth, then you're likely to have problems. So let's just look at one of my Voyager LUTs as an example here. And just because it'll be a little more interesting, let's look at one of the 3D LUTs, which would belong to the palette category. And we'll look at foundation, and we can just pull up any of these. So here is Mars, okay? So you can see the way this is distorting things in 3D space. And I was talking a minute ago about like learning a new language inside of, or learning an instrument, like with my new control surface. Really similar thing here with Fusion, like learning to read a cube. It's like learning to read music. Like, it just takes time. But essentially, you can see this is a three-dimensional object whose dimensions are red, green, and blue. So we go pure red over here, pure green up there, pure blue over there, right? All three, having none of all three of those, what would that be? That'd be black, right? Having all of all three of those, that would be white. That's up here in this corner of the cube. And then the remaining corners, so we've identified 4 corners, and the remaining corners are going to be your cyan, which is green and blue, your magenta, which is, or rather your magenta would be over here, which is red and blue, and then you've got your yellow, which is going to be red and green, okay? So that's kind of what defines those corners there. And by the way, I can drag this around by middle clicking and holding down, or I can rotate it by middle clicking while holding Option, okay? So this is just a way of kind of evaluating the smoothness of a LUT in 3 dimensions. And if we like load up another one, we can get a look at a different one. Now, I'm not so sure I have a great example on hand of a non-fluid, like chunky, broken LUT, because these are all designed to work for you guys. But that's like a good reality check, is to like look at what your cube is doing and make sure that it doesn't look insane. And here's another way that you can just think about looking at cubes, since we're getting geeky for a minute. Turn it into a diamond, okay? So black on bottom, white on top, like so. And now if you look at that diamond from the top down, this is essentially hue and saturation. The further out you are from the center, the more saturated, and the position in this, like if you imagine kind of a circle running around these, that's going to define your hue. So we're going from yellow to red to magenta to blue to green and circling back around to yellow, okay? So that's kind of the idea there in terms of how you can evaluate those things. And then just to quickly answer the second part of the question, we talked about this again in my advanced show LUT design course. Stress testing is the category of image that, or stress test images is the category that we were asking about a moment ago. Those are a really good idea if you are doing look dev in a traditional way, where you're using Resolve to build looks, or you're using DCTLs that you grabbed on the internet, wherever you might have gotten them from, and you just don't know if you can trust them. Those are a necessary thing. I'll give you guys like a dirty secret about my look dev practice. I hate stress testing. I think it's so boring, and every minute that I'm sitting there doing it, I'm like, yeah, but isn't there a way to just simply make sure that I'm not doing anything in the first place that would cause the need for stress testing? Like, that's always been my position, and that's been a big guiding principle in the way I build tools and select tools for myself when I'm doing look dev, is like, I want to have a look dev practice that allows me to not have to do stress testing at all. Now, that's going to be made more available to you with my upcoming plugin that I'm going to be sharing more with you about really soon. But in the meanwhile, if you're not using that plugin, there is no other solution on the market where I would feel at all comfortable telling you, oh, don't worry, just skip the stress testing completely. I think stress testing does have an important role to play. I, to be honest with you, would need to brush up on it myself and get some stress test images pulled back into my library, just because I don't use them, so I don't have them handy, and I don't like have a lot of like insight to share because of like, you know, like common experience or like regular experience with those things. But it is something that's worth exploring and discussing. So maybe something we can cover in the coming weeks here on the channel, either here in grade school or maybe even like a pre-recorded video if you guys are interested. Hope that helps.
Question here about Resolve compared to Baselight. Can you explain the difference or how is the difference between how Resolve does the color management compared to Baselight's color management? Is there any major difference?
Yeah, we got some good, we're going to get kind of geeky today. I dig it. I love when we get geeky in grade school. So here's what I would say. The two key differences in terms of how does color management relate to what you are doing in Resolve versus how does color management relate to what you are doing? How does the internal color management relate to using a Baselight? There's two important things to call out. The first one is that color management, you know, like our sort of baseline, as you guys know, as we talk about here on the channel, like our baseline for like color management being like really well implemented or really kind of like shoddily implemented is still to this day essentially like you know, how much better than this are you getting of just like spinning wheels and moving things into display space by hand, right? So by that reference point, like what I had a moment ago, way better. Resolve color management of like doing a proper chain, okay? But color management, like there's lots of different ways to do it. Some ways are better than others. Some ways are more accurate. Some ways are more pleasing than others. And what I would say is the amount of like intention and energy and research that has gone into the color management frameworks inside of the Baselight is significantly higher to me. Now there's some overlap. Like if you're in a Baselight, you can like grade under like an airy camera LUT, for example, just like you could here in Resolve. And that's something that's done all the time by colorists. So the difference may be significant or it may be none at all, depending on what you're doing. But if you're talking about the internal color management of the Baselight, I think there's been a lot more energy and a lot more color science insight invested into the internal color management system within Baselight as compared to Resolve. And when I say that, that's really less to do with saying like Resolve didn't do as good of a job. I just think they haven't been trying for as long. Baselight is the only system that has been from its original creation designed to work in a scene referred sort of film style grading methodology, as opposed to Resolve, which started as a color corrector. Like Resolve started with what I was doing just a moment ago. Like this is what Resolve used to be. It's just like, you know, spinning wheels until you get a good result. And then they adapted to the changing needs of the industry and of its artists to implement things like color management. But you can still kind of sense that original foundation inside of Resolve. Baselight is a little bit different. Baselight from its genesis was set up to do more scene-referred film style color grading. So that's difference number one in terms of like, what's the difference between the internal color management in Resolve versus the internal color management in Baselight? The other thing that I will call out that is auxiliary, but still very related to the question, is how do all the tools in the color corrector, in the color grading software, behave within that color managed environment? The other thing that I really think makes Baselight noteworthy is that every single tool, pretty much in Baselight, I won't say every single tool, the majority of the tools are designed explicitly to operate within a more color managed style of color grading. So while in Resolve, there's all kinds of things. The majority of the tools, in fact, in Resolve are really not designed for that. They're at best sort of retrofitted and compatible with color management, but most were originally conceived for like display referred style grading. In Baselight, that's really not the case. Most of the tools in Baselight were conceived or implemented as tools that would work well grading in a log scene camera type space with a downstream LUT or output transform or color management or whatever it may be. So those are the two things I would call out there.
A couple of questions here about the linear space. The first one is essentially how to grade in linear, because a lot of VFX artists operate in linear. So how can we translate that space into color grading? For example, if someone is trying to match a clip from Blackmagic Raw to something like, let's say, an ARRI Loxy 4, what should you do in linear beyond color management to get the look in place?
Oh, this is a fun question. So here's what I would say. Like, I'll try to not give a total rambling answer. Linear is a great, like that you've intuited like a really good idea for like where you might do a color matching exercise like that, of matching a Blackmagic Raw camera sensor to an ARRI camera sensor, for example. And what I would say, like, I wish I had I don't have any like easy like one-to-one examples to try to match up necessarily. I don't need that right now. But what I would say is that like linear gain is definitely a great place to start. And linear gain, as you guys know, you can just right click, tag your gamma as linear. And now you're essentially doing, easiest way to think about linear gain is it is the equivalent roughly of log offset. Okay. So like I'm getting a similar thing in terms of moving the entire signal up or down as I would be by doing my log offset. The only difference is that theoretically, like the low end is a little bit more uniform. Like things are going to be affected in a better way up and down the tone scale, whereas an offset, you might see a little bit exaggerated of a response in the low end, in the same way that like exposing in linear gain, let's turn that offset off here as well. Like exposing in linear gain, good, we're still in linear. You know, like your shadows are going to pin a little bit better. If I do, like, let's just do this quick exercise. I'm going to do like this, basically a full stop of opening exposure here in linear, okay? And if I grab a still of that and then wipe this out and do a new node, and we'll try to do a similar exercise in offset here. And I'm just going to try to sort of visually match one to the other. So I think I already went a little further than I needed to. No, maybe not. Let's see. Let me see if I can make this a little bit bigger for you guys as well. Yeah, so this is actually a great example. So like, if we look here, here's the offset version. Here's the linear gain version. I'm probably stretching the ability to read stuff over YouTube, but if you look at like this cabinet area up here, or any real dark regions, the log version, it's milking a little bit more in the shadows. Its response in the low end is a little bit exaggerated compared to what we would really want to see if we're only adjusting exposure and not contrast. And in the linear gain version, that low end is like holding much more than it was a moment ago, right? So that's just exposure. Same thing holds with balance. Like when you are doing balance in log, you're going to see a bit more response in the low end than you really would want to if you're just adjusting balance. So for that reason, linear balance, like applying RGB balance linear gain in linear is a great idea, because you can theoretically get more precise adjustments that don't unduly poison your shadows. Now, is that going to be enough to align the two primaries of those cameras? On any individual shot, definitely maybe. Ultimately, this is a pop quiz for the group. I wish we had more of a... I feel like I complain about this every week. I'm going to stop complaining about it, or we'll figure out how to make a more interactive webinar out of grade school. Because I always want to ask you guys questions. I want to see if you guys are paying attention, even though I know my crowd out there. You got some smart folks out there. But answer to yourself anyway when I ask this question. If I am like trying to take a mathematical color science approach to matching a Blackmagic camera sensor to an ARRI camera sensor, how would I go about that? Like, would I be doing that in linear or not? And what would I be doing in linear in order to do that if I wanted to do it by the numbers using color science? Does anybody know? The way I would be doing that would indeed be in linear, and I would be doing it with a 3x3 matrix. 3x3 matrices are exactly what we are doing when we use our RGB mixer, where we're saying our output red, green, and blue of this process will be formed from a certain amount of our input red, green, and blue for each channel. So it allows you to mix things together. It allows you to get hue rotations. It allows you to get saturation changes, both of which are things you cannot get by working your individual red, green, blue primaries here with your linear gain, for example. So that's like the underpinning of like color management. Color management is driven by matrices. The color checker, like color match function, what that's actually doing under the hood is computing a matrix in linear and then simply applying transforms on either side of it. So like linear 3x3 matrices are a super powerful thing, and that would actually be the ideal instrument for what you're talking about doing. The only challenge is like your mileage may vary. I would say if you feel like it's intuitive and you can sort of figure it out and you want to match your Blackmagic to your ARRI and you can get that match using the RGB mixer, you should. Like that's a really good vehicle for making that match. I've just always found like freehanding a 3x3 matrix or an RGB mixer, I've never found it to be very intuitive. I find it a little bit confusing and I really have to stop and think about what I'm doing. And even though I essentially know now that if I like want to, I don't know, like, you know, like warm my yellows, for example, I can theoretically do that by, let's go to like something with a yellow patch here. If I increase my green in red, see what I mean there? I'm essentially rotating my yellows so that they are a little more gold. See what I mean? But like even now I have to think about that just a little bit. And if you were to hit me with other ones of like, oh, I want to like rotate my blues a little bit more toward indigo. Like there's always going to be that little bit of a pause where I'm like, oh, okay, well, I guess that means I would want to subtract some green. Let's actually see if that's right. Like if we were to subtract some green from our blue, that should theoretically give us a stronger, if I had more of a, like a blue that I could look at here. Yeah, actually, like I'm not getting that one right. So case in point, for me, not a super intuitive thing, but that would be the ideal vehicle. The other thing that you could do in a pinch that I think is more practical if you're just trying to get a more reasonable general match would be to do a, like just straight up RGB gain, like to use your trackball.
Another question here is how different are the different kind of offset operations? Like what is the difference of doing offset in LogC, for example, in DaVinci Wide Gamut or in ACES? And also how is that compared to linear gain or the HDR wheel?
Ooh, fun. I love we're getting geeky today. So HDR wheel, let's start there because that's an easy one. The HDR offset wheel, that is actually linear gain underneath the hood. So that's the same type of thing. So, like as some of you guys may know, like my contention, like for like the one knob that I would touch or the one control that I would actually touch and use all the time in the HDR zones palette would be the global wheel. As y'all may know, I don't really love any of the rest of these things in the HDR zones. I think the idea is really good. And I just think the implementation, like for me, just on a taste basis, I don't really love the way it looks and feels on the image when I use it. So the rest are kind of like off the team for me. I would use this one all the time, except for one reason. That reason is that I have to tap into a new palette in order to use it. So that's the simple reason why just in my template node graph, I have certain nodes flipped over to linear, and then I can keep inside of my primaries palette. Okay, but HDR zones, the global wheel, that actually is linear gain. Now, how does offset differ in between your various log curves? Well, there's like a geeky color science answer I can give you, or I can just show you and give you a sort of like framework for exploring this yourself. Let's just say, like I'm going to do some offset here on this image. We'll open it up. And the fun thing about these gamma tags is you can just look and see like, all right, so that's what that much offset in DaVinci Wide Gamut or in DaVinci Intermediate, really, that's what that does. Now, let's just do a fun experiment. Here's a really easy one to demonstrate. ACES CCT. Okay, that's different, but similar. It just, if anything, feels like it's a bit more exaggerated of an effect. But a fun one to look at would be ACES CCT versus ACES CC. Let's actually go a little further with this offset just to make it really plain to see. And now if you flip from ACES CCT to ACES CC, you can look at the image. Again, let me try to remember to make this a little bigger for you guys. You can look at the image, or you can look at the histogram down below. Watch what happens. We get a change. It's actually not as big as I would have expected. Maybe easier to spot in the histogram than in the image itself. But you can see in CCT, we're kind of capping or like clamping off our low end, whereas in CC, it's staying where it was at. And that really speaks to like why different log curves behave differently. It all depends on where their cut function is. Like pretty much all log curves have some sort of like change in their math, like down near zero, because zero and log are difficult things to make work together. So there's some kind of function that says, as we get close to zero, do something different, essentially. And we call that a toe or a cut function. ACES CCT, the T in CCT stands for toe. So that's essentially why we're going to see the difference there. There's other like contributing reasons, but that's the main difference you'll see between log curve A versus log curve B is like what kind of cut or what kind of cut or toe function does it have that's changing that behavior down in the bottom, which by the way is also why we get that milking thing down there. If it was a pure log curve, which basically no operational log curve is, then log offset and linear gain would net identical results. But because for other reasons that's not practical, we get a slight difference there.
Super fun question here. What do you think about DCTLs? Do you think it's better to use them or to find a solution inside Resolve? What do you think works best for a colorist to learn the software and find the solution by themselves, or to find an already made solution for your problem?
Oh, that is a really good question. So here's what I would say. To learn DCTL, or rather, you're not even asking about learning DCTL. Do I seek out custom solutions, or do I try to implement as best I can inside of Resolve? Here's what I would say. You should start, like, all things being equal, let's say you could have any tool you needed that could do anything you wanted, and you can do it either as a Resolve tool or as a DCTL. Which would be better? Resolve tool, right? You don't have to download anything. You don't have to wonder if it's up to date. You don't have to wonder if it's supported. The Resolve tool would be better because it's internal, it's native, it's simpler. So what I would recommend is that you start with the Resolve tools and you work with the Resolve tools and let things start to bother you a little bit. And then over time, they're going to start to bother you a lot bit. And then you really, really let it come to a point where you're like, man, I want this and I cannot get this. I'll give you like a really easy example here. When I'm in Resolve, as you guys know, like my stock tree that we talk about here all the time on the channel is I like to hit exposure, and then I like to hit my contrast ratio. Those things are highly related, but I find it helpful to think about them in individual pieces. So I'm going to set my gamma to linear here. That's how I do my exposure, is with linear gain, like so. And then I'm going to go over to my ratio node. And what I like to use for contrast, or for, changing my contrast ratio, essentially, I could use lift and gain. I could go over to my HDR palette like we talked about a minute ago, but my preference is to use contrast pivot. So that's what I'm going to use here to make this adjustment. And in my preset node graph, I've got my pivot set to the mid gray of my working space. It doesn't have to stay there, but it's a good place for it to live by default. Okay. So I'm just adding in theoretically neutral contrast that pivots around the mid gray of my working space. Here's what bugs me. If we turn our downstream stuff off for a moment, here's what has always bugged me about contrast inside of Resolve. I like the mechanism of contrast. I like two knobs. I like being able to anchor things at an explicit pivot point. There's a lot that I like about working contrast in that way, as opposed to lift and gain, for example. But what I don't love is that here inside of Resolve, I can do contrast one of two ways. I can do linear contrast, like you see me getting now, where I'm just increasing the slope, like literally the steepness of this line, and pivoting around whatever pivot point I've elected. Or project-wide, if I go to my project settings, general options, and I tick use S-curve for contrast, watch this waveform when I hit save. It rolls. It compresses at the top and bottom, right? So slope in the middle stays the same. Top and bottom end up getting compressed. I generally don't want that. I generally want to have the opportunity to introduce hard contrast using my contrast and pivot. But sometimes I do. Sometimes I just want a little bit of it. Those are all things that there is no way to implement with contrast pivot inside of Resolve. You can get a slightly different result in the HDR palette, but again, that means you have to tap over to a new zone. And I actually think the contrast pivot in the HDR palette feels ultra weird and has other problems. So that's an example to me of something that like I've used contrast pivot as my ground way of defining contrast ratio for, I don't know, like 10 years in Resolve. And at some point in that journey, I went from being like, gosh, I wish I could flip in between linear or rolling on like an overall or on an individual shot level as opposed to like on everything. And I wish I could have a little bit of roll versus like having to buy all the roll. That's what led me to actually create my BaseCon tool that I use now. And it has a curve visualizer here, which I like. But if we like look at this, turn our downstream stuff back on, here's my BaseCon tool. It's set up with a contrast pivot in the same way. By default, it's actually in the middle, but right here with my roll off at 0, it's a pure linear. But if I go all the way over here, it rolls, right? And I can go anywhere in between. I can get it sort of rolly or sort of linear, all of which I find advantageous. So the fact is, like, I got to a point where like I knew what I wanted this to do before I built it, and then I went and built it. But I didn't have to be a DCTL developer at that point to know like hey, I really wish there was a DCTL that did this. Or to be able to understand if someone had shown this to me, this is valuable and here's why. So that's what I would say is like, take your tools in Resolve as far as you can and let stuff bother you and think deeply about why it bothers you and what you wish it did. And that way you can start to overlay that against what else is available out there. And does that solve a problem for me? Do I understand what functionality the tool is offering to me? That's the way to sort of start to step out of the native tools of Resolve and to start to incorporate DCTLs into your practice, is out of necessity and with like a good foundation of knowledge of understanding what these tools do. Otherwise, like if you don't have that, it's just kind of overwhelming. It's like, okay, great. Now I have to learn like this massive tool set inside of Resolve, and I have to learn how every DCTL that's available for free or for sale on the internet works as well. Like it's kind of overwhelming and not really realistic. So I think that could be a good framework for how to think about when and how to incorporate DCTLs into your grading.
Let's stick with DCTLs. Question from Sasha. Do you still use the Colorist tool that you developed back then in your everyday color practice?
No, I don't use Colloid. What I use, essentially, like I'll spill a little bit more to you guys about this lookdev plugin that's going to be coming out. That is essentially the product of about a year of effort on my part to take all of the far-flung like DCTLs and math and hacks and tweaks and tricks that I now use for lookdev, and to incorporate them into a simple, intuitive, powerful, versatile, user-friendly plugin that allows you to do the same stuff that I do, like with that sort of custom stack of custom solutions that I've built and implemented after the framework of Colloid. Colloid was like, kind of a Gen 1 or Gen 2 of my, custom color science lookdev practice, and I've just kept building from there. So this new plugin is essentially going to give you that ability to do lookdev the way that I do, using the custom solutions that I do. And now that I've done that, and it's a stable product, it's going to be out of beta soon, and again, we'll be announcing more about it here on the channel. That's what I use for lookdev. It's a single plugin. Everything that I do and that I want to do for my look development all lives within that plugin. It's all streamlined, it's all tested, and it is organized and simple and intuitive to use, which to me is like, those are some of the biggest things for us as artists. And again, this kind of connects up to the prior question. I would really encourage you, like, you're supposed to be demanding as an artist. Like, you need to know your stuff. You need to learn like the limitations, like me figuring out, oh, I can't get linear contrast and rolling contrast within one project, or I can't get halfway in between linear and rolling contrast. I had to learn that by putting in time and by studying my tools. But once you put in that time to learning and understanding your tools, you should be demanding of your tools and be like, no, I want my tools to do this. So in that sense, like, I'm demanding of like my lookdev tools. I'm like, I don't want to be using like a big, massive stack of DCTLs that I sourced from 5 different places that seem to do things that I like and that I kind of understand. I want one solution that I understand every inch of, that does good things and that I can really rely on. Like, we should all be able to articulately demand exactly what we want or need for our creative practice. That's, I think, in the nature of all artists, to be empowered and confident enough to be like, I need this, someone make it for me. Whether or not you're the one to make it. It happens in my case that no one was, at the time, there was like no one around who was going to do that except me. It's a whole different world now. There's lots of people out there who are into this stuff and developing these things. And if you know what you want and how to ask for it, then you can usually find the solution that you want, or maybe even find someone who can build it for you.
So what's your take on power grids? A lot of people offer them to buy online. So what's your take on them compared to plugins or DCTLs or lookup tables?
You know what? I think power grades are kind of awesome, to be honest with you. I think power grades are a really great way to stretch that understanding and that utilization of Resolve as, whether it's a lookdev or a grading tool, whatever those power grades are meant to do. So I think they're great. I think their primary utility is for you to learn. Like, maybe you're going to grab a power grade that you're like, oh, wow, that's my bread and butter now, and I'm going to use it on everything, and it's just a thing that does a thing. But in that case, I would say like you're better off buying a really high quality LUT pack like Voyager, if it's for a implementation of a creative look, for example, because that's going to be better quality generally than any power grade you're going to find out there, simply because power grades are made under the limitations of Resolve. So if that's all you want is like, I just want a turnkey thing that works, that gives me a good image, go grab Voyager, go grab, like my free 2383 or the 3510 or something from Ares Look Library might be another good place to look. I would do something like that. If you want to learn something and get more knowledgeable about your tool set and what it is capable of doing, power grades are a great way to do that, because obviously you can drill into the nodes and see what's being done within them. So I think that's a great way to get more fluent, more literate in the way that your grading software works. I would just sort of like go into it with a clear concept of like, all right, here is why I am purchasing this. I am purchasing it because it's going to teach me about my tool, and it's going to allow me to maybe make modifications and customizations of that power grade, but not necessarily because, again, I think I'm sort of thinking rather specifically about look development and about emulations I see out there, for example. They're like, hey, here's my power grade of like a Kodak 5219, for example, or a 2383 for that matter. I see those and I say like, wow, that's, in some cases, that can be an impressive effort. And when someone gets that looking good, I'm like, wow, that's impressive. But it's impressive in the same way that it would be impressive to say like, oh, I don't know, like I managed to drive to work with one tire fully deflated. Like, cool, good on you. You also could have just had all 4 tires on the car, which again, I don't mean to knock any power grade developers, but I do think ultimately for a lot of the ways I see power grades being implemented, they're not necessarily the ideal, like Resolve is not necessarily the ideal toolkit for developing those solutions. And sometimes it shows. That's kind of a long answer, but I hope that helps.
What do you think about using lookup tables, film lookup tables, the ones that Resolve offer by default, on, let's say, random logarithmic color spaces that are not Cineon, since the question is essentially that if the primaries from film were not stable or are not stable, is there really a major compromise utilizing those lookup tables over a logarithmic color space that is not Cineon? Is there really a lot of problems doing that?
I'm glad that question came up too, because I feel like I would have given you a different answer a year ago. You make a great point. What are the primaries of film? Is there really that big of an issue with using a, traditional FPE LUT on top of material that maybe isn't explicitly shot on film? And I would say no, there's not necessarily a problem with that. There's 2 things that you need to watch out for when you're doing that. I'm going to say 3 things. 3 things you need to look out for. Number 1 thing, because that's a table that was developed under very particular circumstances, anytime you are violating the design conditions, design circumstances of a LUT, you run the risk of breakage. That's like the exact scenario where you'd want to do stress testing, like we were talking about before, because you're going to be passing values, or it's highly likely you'll be passing values through that LUT that were never expected to go through it. Sometimes that's fine. Sometimes the LUT can handle those things just fine. Sometimes it can't. It's easy to see, like, we could probably trigger it here in this timeline with, I don't know, I wonder, it might not happen here because it's most often in cyane stuff, but if we look at this shot, let's just strip everything off for a second. Or let's say we're in DaVinci Y Gamma Intermediate, because this is log C4, and that's a particularly odd log metric. So let's look at this, and let's look at our film looks and just see what happens if we throw 2383 on there. Look, that actually works fine. So that warning that I was about to give, or that I'm giving here, in this case doesn't apply. It works fine. So make sure you're passing that minimum baseline of like, make sure it's not breaking anything, and that whatever scope of material you're applying it to, you better check all those shots, because if it works on 100 and then the 101st doesn't work, now you're in a really precarious situation if you're like delivering that job and you have to recreate what this thing did on the first 100 shots because you can't use it for the rest of the film. So that would be number one. The number two thing I would look out for is your middle gray itself. So something that you'll often see that actually this shot will be an easy one to pick on. Something you will often see when you're applying a film LUT is stuff's going to get really, really heavy with that film LUT being applied, as you see here. And what you're going to find is like, okay, like, can I just open up underneath it? Like, yeah, you can do that. Do you want to do that 100 times or 200 times or 2,000 times if you're grading a film? If the answer is yes, then this is another thing to watch out for that I wouldn't worry too much about. But I would watch out for like, where is the effective mid-gray of your shots in whatever tone curve you're in versus what effective mid-gray is that FPE LUT expecting? And if those things are super far apart, you might just need to be prepared for doing a lot of like manual exposure compensation, or you need to figure out a bit of a different solution for the way you're implementing that LUT. That would be number two. And the last one that I will call out that like is maybe the most minor of these three, but to me it's really significant. The number one thing that you're going to see, like this goes probably most directly to the question. The number one thing that you're going to see of like, oh, well, I'm using primaries that aren't really film primaries, but honestly, who really cares? The number one thing you're going to see there, like if I take this log C image with no input transform, no output transform, and throw this 2383 on here, the number one thing that you're going to see, actually I don't see it as much here, but you will see a lot, is you're going to see foliage. This one is probably a better example. You're going to see foliage go like really yellow, and it's going to be tough to get like real green out of the thing. So that's just something else. Like that's one example of something to look out for in general is like, if you like the way it's reproducing colors, cool. But if you don't, then you might have a good reason why, which is that it's mapping inputs to outputs that in a way that it really wasn't designed to. So that's just a last thing to look out for that I feel like was like really a thing in like the early 2010s, mid 2010s, when everyone started using FPE LUTs, not because they needed to for a DI, but because they just wanted to use them creatively. And because they thought, oh, this is a one-stop solution to getting film. They weren't necessarily clocking like, yeah, but certain colors are consistently reproducing like wrong. In fact, just a quick anecdote about that I'll wrap this up with is that I can remember working at a post facility under a colorist, a really creative, like cool, talented colorist who had noticed that so much, this specific issue that I'm talking about of like, gosh, foliage just has a tendency to burn up and go like autumny underneath a film LUT when you're not like using it in a more like rigorous way. And you're just like saying, my primaries are my primaries and they're good enough. This colorist actually had to come up with like, he had come up with a custom solution for sort of like sidestepping that portion of the LUT so that he could get those really lush greens out of particular footage. So that's an example of an improvised solution to a problem that I've seen a lot. I think many people have seen a lot, and we've started to hip to like, all right, there are downsides to feeding in the wrong primary set into an FPE LUT, even if the expected primaries are a little bit sort of ambiguous. So thanks for coming to my TED talk about FPE LUTs. Sorry, I didn't mean to go that hard on it, but hopefully that is some helpful context for that. All right, we got time for one more.
Let's go to color spaces. We already know that, for example, using saturation in HSV is way different than using saturation in HSL or any other kind of model. So what about the luminance? Is there any major difference between the luminance in the V channel or of HSV and the luminance of HSL, or even the luminance in LAV? What is the difference between the luminance in those color spaces?
You guys are cool. It's great stuff to be talking about. Yeah, there is a difference between those things. So let's check this out. Here's what we'll do. I don't even need to turn anything off right now. All of those things, like here's like a bit of geeky color science terminology for you. You are talking about what's called a luminance norm. So HSV has a luminance norm, HSL has a luminance norm, LAB has a luminance norm. All of these are ways of doing something we've talked about here on the channel plenty, which is to say like, well, the camera didn't capture luminance. The camera didn't capture saturation. The camera captured a certain amount of red, a certain amount of green, and a certain amount of blue at each photo site, right? Or, for each, photosite sensor, red, green, and blue photosite on the sensor itself. So what we really need to do if we want to derive luminance is we need some sort of formulation that says, hey, take this red, green, and blue and combine it or stack it or do other stuff to it, and the result of that operation will be my luminance norm, okay? And just to give like some easy examples here, let's use my friend the splitter combiner, and I'm gonna do a color space transform. And we're gonna go first to HSV. And just so we don't have to look at a completely zany image when we're not evaluating things, we can look at in here, this is my luminance norm in HSV. For the geeky among us, the math that drives the luminance norm of this operation is to say, hey, look at the value of the red pixel, look at the value of the green pixel, look at the value of the blue pixel, and I'm talking about for every single individual pixel in this frame. Look at all three of those values, and whichever of them is the greatest, that's the luminance norm. So that's the way that's being computed, okay? If we look at HSL, it's going to be different. HSL, to be honest with you, I don't remember off the top of my head. I think it's either a minimum, so you look at those and you say, oh, it's actually the minimum as opposed to the maximum, or it may be a slightly more complicated, like a mid RGB type of thing. So all these different formulas you can use. So like HSV uses max of the 3 channels. Like generic, like Y in Resolve uses a ratio essentially of saying, hey, we're going to make the luminance from about 70% of the green channel, about 20% of the red channel, and about 10% of the blue channel. That's rough numbers, but approximately. So that's one way of forming a luminance norm. Another way of forming it is what I just said a moment ago. You say, well, actually, look at all 3 of those, and whatever is the lowest, that represents the minimum amount of color in the frame, so in the pixel, so that must mean it represents our neutrals, right? You can get geeky and take that min RGB and that max RGB, add them together, divide them by 2 to get what's called mid RGB, somewhere in between those. These are all subtly different ways of arriving at a luminance norm. Sometimes they can make a big difference, sometimes they can't. Honestly, the biggest difference, this is also something we've talked about here on the channel before, but if you think about a model like HSV, where the coordinates of HSV, it's a cylinder, right? So the vertical axis is luminance, right? The radius of that cylinder is hue angle, and the distance from center of a particular pixel represents saturation, right? So those coordinates are what's called orthogonal to each other, right? So by definition, if I'm changing the luminance of a pixel and it rests at a particular position around that outer ring and a certain distance from the center, it shouldn't move when I raise its luminance. Those other 2 values, the H and the S, should stay the same, right? That's what orthogonal means. So in that sense, our V or our L or whatever our luminance norm is can actually have a big impact on our other channel. That V, by the way, in HSV, that's what makes saturation in HSV feel the way it does, is because it's saying, hey, the V is already at the max, so nothing is ever going to get brighter than that. That's why things feel quote unquote subtractive in HSV. So oftentimes, like when you're directly operating on a luminance channel, you can see some differences by deriving that channel in different ways. But oftentimes you'll see just as much difference, maybe even more difference by operating on the other 2 channels of whatever model that you're in, because those 2 are going to change because they're going to be locked out from altering that V or that L channel. So that's kind of some geeky rambling there, but it's something that's like totally worth exploring and playing with. Another like simple one that I'll leave us with here, we've talked about it here on the channel, I think in the last couple episodes a little bit, or certainly in my last pre-record. If we look at, why am I getting this weird behavior? There we go. So if we look at something that we talked about in my last video, what if I want to alter the luminance of this image, but I don't want to alter the saturation of it? Like if I bring my gain down, you can actually see that my signal mass in my vector scope is shrinking, right? If I bring it up, it's going to come out, right? What if I don't want that? What if I don't want to see that? Well, I've got 2 options. One of them would be to go to my primaries bars and work my Y only. And that's going to be a lot more stable, not perfectly, but a lot more stable on that vector scope. The other option is something that I talked about in that last video. So let's open this up. but now I'm going to right click here and I'm going to set my composite mode to luminosity. Okay, that's holding that saturation better than it would have otherwise. Luminosity uses yet another formula for defining a luminance channel. I think luminosity is something like 50% green, 30% red, 20% blue. Don't quote me on those numbers, but it's slightly different than the way that resolve derives a Y. In that case, I don't think the difference is that visible when you're looking at a particular image and comparing the two, but it is an example of yet another luminance norm and the way things can be calculated and vary depending on what composite mode you're using or what DCTL or what native tool and resolve you're using. Lots of subtle difference. Sometimes it can make for a really big visual difference in what you're doing. Sometimes it can make for a really subtle difference or even an undetectable one. So I hope that's a fun sort of a flight, a sampler of ideas about luminance norms and the impact they can make on your process. Okay, guys, that went pretty good. I feel like I learned how to turn to my left a little bit better by the end of this session than I knew how to do before the session. So that's cool. Thanks to everyone for joining me for my first session here in the new suite. Like I said, we're not done with my home office. That place is still up and running, and I'm definitely going to still be doing grade school from there as well. But wanted to give you guys a little taste of this place. If I'm able to swing it for our next session, then I'll set up some kind of way to give you guys a little bit of a tour of the space so you can check it out. But really glad to geek out with you guys. This was a great session. So many good questions. Thank you guys as always for showing up with your passion and your good questions and for geeking out with me on Friday mornings. Enjoy the rest of your Friday. Enjoy your weekend and see you next week here on the channel. Take care.